Stephen will be talking to us about astrocartography, which is got to be a fascinating subject. Okay.
Thank you, Ted. It's nice to be back. This time I'm just north of you all, because I've been using astrocartography myself, and I followed my sun line, starting down there last August, September, in the Asheville, Hendersonville area. And then I started looking for properties and towns, and then I went from that area there. Actually, I can go back a little bit further. I was looking also in Florida, because that same sun line goes all the way down through the Bay Area on the west coast of Florida, which is funny for me because I was born in the Bay Area, the real Bay Area of California. It's funny to hear that when I'm down there. But yeah, so I started down there in the Asheville area, lovely country, as you all know, and then just worked my way up and checked out the little towns and properties and so forth. And then I happened to end up here next to Roanoke, Virginia. One could say with this particular topic that I do practice what I preach, and then I will have a couple of different examples of things that I have personally experienced with this interesting way of looking at astrology. And so I've got a presentation here that I will now share the screen. Basically, we're talking about like where in the world, and many people, of course, are very interested in your personality charts, character, talents, interests, goals, gifts, things like that for character analysis and so forth, as well as relationship charts are, of course, very popular. And, the bread and butter are relationship charts, as well as career and money, income. But we're more and more a transient society, and people are very curious, what does it look like on the other side of the fence, on the other side of the state line, on the other side of maybe an ocean? Well, I'm certainly one of those people. And since I have my chart here for a little bit of show and tell, you'll be able to find that out by checking that part out. So where in the world? And something quite known here, and I could either just let you all read it, or I could read it. Parable of the Seed by Jesus. One day, a farmer went out sowing. Part of what he sowed landed on a footpath, where birds came and ate it up. Part of it fell on rocky ground, where it had little soil. It sprouted at once, since the soil had no depth, but when the sun rose and scorched it, it began to wither for lack of roots. Again, part of the seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked it. Part of it finally landed on good soil and yielded grain 100 or 60 or 30-fold. Let everyone heed what he hears. So the big questions that many people would ask to yourselves, to your neighbors, over a beer, over some wine, and being drawn to a foreign culture. Is it the language? Is it the architecture? Is it the food? There's so many things that can attract one. And me as a hypnotherapist, that's another hat that I wear, doing past life regressions, I might ask, well, yeah, here's the attraction to a particular place, a country, a culture, but is there perhaps a past life there? Or is it actually you're attuned to a particular planet or two that is pulling you or calling you into a particular area? It may be also within the community, let's say, here within the United States, where there is an ethnic group or a subculture there, a Persian culture, Mexican culture, and maybe you like the food right there. Maybe you too, like I, have been an expat, and I lived for many years in Europe, And I think of that as a Uranus experience, and perhaps the 11th house could be involved, the ruler of the 11th and so forth. But when you find yourself personally going to these other places, other countries, maybe for a university or something, then I'll be looking for Jupiter or the 9th house influence. So who, when, and where? The who, of course, of chart analysis is the interpretation of your horoscope. Then we come towards the when, which is predictive analysis. When will I get married? When will I get divorced? When will I get the heck out of here? And that's the when. That's predictive. That's astrological transits and progressions. And then we have the astrocartography dealing with the location. And that is the where. As in, where in tarnation should I go next? So some of you may already know a bit about the astrocartography, but I'm just going to pretend that some of you are, beginners. Some of you are well versed. I hope to give a little bit of something for each of you. Basically, there are those 4 lines, and I'm going to have an example or two of those 4 lines, recognizing that that is how it started off, because since then there's been some other, innovations. And those 4 lines that we see on any chart are the MC line, medium coli. This is a longitudinal line up and down. And it is pointing towards career. It's along the longitude. It represents authority or career, the outer world. A parental energy, it's yang. Oftentimes connected to bosses, power, control, offers and opportunities outside of your control sometimes. One's social status and contribution, lifestyle choices that can be seen, reputation. So therefore the objective or social self, that's the MC. And those planets that we find or come across, or maybe find just natally right where we're at, whether that be in Connecticut or Virginia or North Carolina, it might be right there on that midheaven line. Then we have opposite that, the IC, the Imam Coli, which is the nadir. It's a straight line also along the longitude on all of those maps, opposite the MC. It represents the home, the hearth. You recognize that from perhaps the 4th house terms, but parental energy, which is yin, family, property, or real estate, vehicles, by the way, to explore your territory, but that moves us off towards the 3rd house emphasis, your living space and the things you collect in it, cultivating your home and your home environment, and opposite again of the midheaven, which is the objective self. This is more the subjective self. Then we have lines upon the ascendant. And usually these lines, by the way, ascendant, descendant, other lines, other aspects, they're more curved. They're not horizontal. They're not longitudinal. They curve off to one or another side. The ascendant and planets and points along the ascendant representing yourself, your body and health, routines that aid your health, and that which you take personally or initiate on your own, preferences and habits, even attitudes. Interestingly, when you change your ways and adapt or shift or let's say diverge from your other sense because of the ascendant energies, others will interact with you differently, which brings them to the descendant line. Again, a curved line, complementary to the ascendant. And it represents classically the other one-on-one interactions, marriage and partnerships, for instance, the object of affection or scorn, loves and love interests, don't forget, a marriage or even a devotion to God or an ideal can be also found with that descendant. A direct confrontations or mergings, meetings, significant people, and adapting to others. Those are just some of the things. Here is an example of, by the way, from my perspective, I cannot see the very top of this, but can you see the whole thing where it says, you know, example mystery guest? You all can see that?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Yeah, it kind of disappears on my screen, but yeah, so this is just an example of an astrocartography chart, and we will be taking a look at who this belongs to a little bit later. But just take a look there. You'll see over here, going over Ireland, we've got Saturn on the midheaven over on the top left. And so representing, of course, that straight line going from top to bottom, that's the midheaven line, a Saturnian thing going down into Spain, Portugal. And just as an orientation to this. And then you'll see over here above Oslo, you've got Neptune on the descendant. And then that line, because it's a descendant line or an ascendant line, they curve. And so this one curves off going towards France and Spain. And this is just as an orientation, for instance. We'll talk about this person here pretty soon. Again, another example, as we go, let's say going down here to the middle of the chart and down below the heels of Italy, you'll see a red line, and it's a dotted line. And this is, by the way, solar maps that I use with Solar Fire. And this is Mars on the IC. And so it's, again, a straight line. It's a longitudinal line, goes right straight up. So there is that Martian influence going to be felt right through there. And again, that goes up through Bosnia and Poland, etc. So again, this is just a quick view. I'm sure many of you already have your own charts made up. And just to give you an idea, modern origins. I lived in San Francisco about 20 years ago, and I met Jim Lewis, and we talked about him developing the AstroCartography. And he was very interested in just sharing it. And he was excited about this as an option, as a possibility. And I'm not sure if he brainstormed this with other people, but it was definitely a San Francisco thing. And it's turned into, it had its own business. And but then there's been variations of that with different programs and so forth. A very nice fellow. He started off with relocated charts, and we'll be looking at some of those here as an examples here pretty soon. And so it turns into a locality chart, and you can take with many different programs, start off with a basic natal chart, and then you relocate it to another longitude and latitude, and then it's a locality chart. And that changes many different things, but all of the angles, all of the exact degrees of the moon and Mercury and Mars and so forth, that does not change. It's just the ascendant, the midheaven, all the different houses, it just revolves, moves. So here we go. And looking at this fictitious character, and over on the left-hand side is my chart over in California. It was across the bay in the Bay Area of San Francisco. You'll see on the left-hand side, there's the Libra rising. And here up in the 10th house, you'll notice a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. And I must admit, I'm pretty happy about those. Because that's kept me traveling, and it got me very interested in many different cultures and places, and put me onto several frequent flyer programs. This is just as again an example. You start off with your natal chart, your birth chart, and then on the right-hand side, This is my chart relocated to Vienna, Austria. And I spent several years there. And again, all of the planets are in the exact same degree and minute. It's just that the rest of the houses have changed, and that therefore creates, the map. Now, notice also here, because this is going to be an example here coming up of my own personal maps, over on the right-hand side of the Vienna relocation chart, that is, of course, the descendant, and you see those two same planets I mentioned, Jupiter and Uranus. They're, only 2 degrees away, but they're split right there. One's in the 6th house, one's in the 7th house there in Vienna. But again, that is just visually showing that those two are going to be really right on the descendant. And then you go up to the 10th house, and you notice that the 10th house goes off here to the left. And I'm not sure, can you see my cursor? Okay, yeah, so I'm circling up here Venus here at 28 Scorpio, and that's the midheaven right up there. And so you're going to guess that with my astrocartography chart that Venus is going to be close to the midheaven, and you can visually see that. And I mentioned this because we're going to go from these charts relocated to the maps back to the charts, and that's part of the deciphering. So here again, I was born in California, and using just the classic midheaven nadir ascendant, descendant, there's going to be some places in one's chart where not much is happening. And so here's an example of that. I have got here the moon's nodes going up. And again, you can see that it's going over here, that section of Nevada, going through Fresno, going through Bakersfield there, just north of Los Angeles, that straight line. Okay, and then you don't see anything else in that whole area, right? And except out in the water over here, we've got used a couple of asteroids, and that's Vesta. So for some people, that would be kind of disappointing, especially if you had your heart set on show business in Los Angeles. But there's a way to get around this. And here we have now the Stephen in California chart, now spicy. And this is showing the other aspects in there. And I'm using, again, the Solar Fire program. And then one can then add some lines that they're called. And those basically 2 extra lines or aspects would be a square and a trine. But it'd be a square of the very same, planets and points. And then a trine that could come up from the bottom or the top, which then kind of points towards sextiles, as it were. So now this chart, and again, here's my natal chart right there to be seen, now makes California a little bit more busy, a little bit more interesting. And in fact, since I'm right there in the Bay Area, right above it, going straight up and down, is a Pallas Athena trining the midheaven. And if you can see my cursor, I'm going over to my chart, and you can see here in the 2nd house, here's the Pallas Athena, 4 degrees, and that is in a water sign Scorpio, and that, of course, that's going to go right straight up here. That's 5 degrees up here to the midheaven, and so there's the trine right there. And that line over here just shows, the influence right there. Make sense? And the same thing goes for all the rest of the. So now we're adding other aspects and lines to any chart. And this is just an example of that. So a close-up of some of those. Again, here, if you can see my cursor, here's that same Pallas Athena making the trine right over there. It's that straight up line. Off here to the left, we have the Vesta Over here is the moon's nodes. Here's the sun trining the midheaven. And then we've got both the north and south nodes busy over there, right next to Mars trining the ascendant. And here on the far right is Saturn trining the midheaven. And this is just an example. And what you may be interested in now is a whirlwind tour. And some of you already have your charts out, I imagine, I hope. A tour of what do some of these different planets mean on the different lines. And that's, of course, the meat of the subject, as it were. And so you can take notes, or you can listen to this recording here a little bit later. But the sun, in general, life, vitality, spirit. Think ebullience, sunny, the self, self-directed, individuation, personality, creativity. It's oftentimes that's a fire sign energy, sports, performance. Also recognition, could be popularity, the theater, risk-taking, originality, gold. Think of those, all of those colors come with these different planets and points. There can be, therefore, also, besides the energies that you might feel, maybe some important people that come into your life in these different areas. People connected to the sun could be important people, public figures, speakers, performers, central figures, strong personalities, definitely not the shy ones, mentors, educators, entertainers, actors, famous persons. In fact, I think that Barbara Martin is amongst the group here that I saw here. She's someone I just met, a local performer, quite a talented woman, and an example of somebody sunny on my line right over here. The moon, being close to your moon line. Oftentimes, I think that you may find people along your moon line who want to adopt you. It's like your clan, it's your group. There's a connection right there. Finding family and community, therefore. Your own home, your preferred ways. It points towards writings and recollections. One of the reasons why some people might want to move to a moon line, especially to touch upon your memories, nostalgic feelings, intuitions, and then writing about that. It's commerce and trade, emotional attachments, things of the past, shelter, bonding, or chains, focus upon food and security, and maybe food or security as businesses, interest in young children and child welfare. Think also of the color, the silvery moon, silver, soft gray, things like that. I'm wondering if I'm getting grayer. People connected to the moon line. Sometimes a more mature female, a mother figure, sometimes a nurturer, a provider, sometimes a provider of emotional security. But the opposite of side of that is babies and young kids and those who care for them. Worriers, relatives or friends that might be worrying about you or caring about you, sharing the feelings. Opportunities, therefore, for generosity and people who can be like family. Mercury, along your Mercury line. Current events, travels, communications, writing. Of course, you think about that with Mercury. Intellectual stimuli, studies, languages, mail, news, working with paper, making agreements or deals, contracts, documents, certificates, diplomas, patterns and designs, mercurial, curious, the student, but also people would be salespeople, college students, tourists, unless you're the tourist, teenagers, peers, messengers, news gatherers and disseminators, networkers, diplomats and go-betweens, con artists, phone operators, linguists, Mercury. Then you go towards your Venus line. Venus, love and beauty, art, music, dance, romance, yay. Yin, fertility, money, gifts, pleasures, sensuality. Small animals, interestingly enough. Fashion, colors, styles. Image enhancements like hairstyle, clothes, and so forth. Allurement and attraction. Conceit, balance, law, PR, poetry, plays, and novels, theater, jewelry, and adornments, things that allure, pastel colors. People along that Venus line, females in general, young females, artists, musicians, temptations, craftspeople, feminine types, affectionate friends, florists, actors, lawyers, negotiators, mediators, art lovers, sexy, sensual types, lovers. And then there's the Mars line. We go towards the Yang now. Sports, action, courage, directed motivation, muscles, excitement, accidents, surgery. I must admit, I'm close to my Mars line, and I now have got some stitches on my side. Just within months. I'm okay though. Mars, assertiveness, desire, and attainment. Adventures, in and out of bed. Iron, red, vibrant colors. Impulsiveness. People on Mars lines. Males, military, hunters. Aggressive or coarse types. Mechanics. Athletes, skilled technicians. Heroes. Young men. Police protectors and robbers. In fact, I tell you what, I've got that same Mars. It goes through, I think it's Alabama. I don't have that part up here, but like 20 years ago, I was taking a trip across the United States, and it was late at night. This was before the GPS, and I looked for a place to stay, and so there I was on my Mars line, knowing that at the time, and so I end up going to a place called the Knight's Inn. You've heard of that chain, you know, the Knight, okay, Knight. And so that's where I stayed. And then in the morning, there were police cars in the parking lot, and because the place had been robbed that night. So Marsy, it was a very Marsy place. Adventures there with Mars. Protectors, firefighters, exercise sports buddies, recreation instructors, all kinds of physical activities. I'm looking forward to biking and hiking here. And then you go across your Jupiter line. Long distance travels, studies, opportunities, philosophy, schools and university, nature, expansion, luck indeed by Jove, happiness, more is better, says Jupiter, publications, big animals. One step backwards, Mars could be like animals used in farms and labor, bulls, oxen, things like that. Sheep. So Jupiter, other cultures, international, mountains and mountainous regions, I have noticed. Enjoyment, circus, laughter, social events, growth. Wealth, royal purple, violet, expansive colors, expensive items, inspiration, news from afar. And then there's that Saturn line. And classic, you know, sort of work, duty, career, responsibilities, discipline. A lot of people are afraid to go to their Saturn lines, but I was born with Sun conjunct Saturn, and so, you know, so what? But it gives a certain discipline, responsibilities, taking on tasks, being organized, being responsible, and so forth. Especially if someone is, let's say, drifting a bit, you know, it may not be a bad idea to like shape up and get over there to your Saturn line. There can be getting into big projects, payoffs, worldly success. It's practical routines. There may be some periodic tragedies or loss, definitely changes and gifts of patience, challenges and opportunities, government, the law, bureaucracy, office, structure, promotions and recognition, authority, obstacles and breakthroughs, time. This is Father Time, blacks, grays, dark colors. People, Saturnian people, established people, the elders, authorities, and those in power, officials, bureaucrats, father figures, achievers, controllers, conservatives, disciplinarians, catalysts for change, often of an unconscious dynamic. Bosses, economists, and bankers, administrators, reactionaries, timekeepers, clerks. Then we go towards planet Uranus, your Uranian lines, and that's another one, by the way, that I had experienced over there in Vienna, Austria. Group dynamics, clubs and associations. And think, by the way, when Uranus becomes strong with a child, you know, usually before the age of 14, that could be Boy Scouts, 4-H clubs, brownies, things like that coming into one's life. Later on, of course, ethnic groups, Uranus's psychic phenomena, high-tech equipment, computers, internet, the thing that we're working with right now, Zoom. Science fiction, eccentricities, extremists, but novelties, astrology, awakening, civil disobedience, nonprofit organizations, computer or science labs, Uranian types, Uranian people, mavericks, individualists, rebels, revolutionaries, internet surfers, club members, ethnic and political minorities, psychics, astrologers, visionaries, new agers. Some of you are probably guilty of all of that. There can be extremists, theoreticians, sometimes bipolar, geniuses, and the mentally unstable, both nonconformists, eccentrics, altruists, radicals. Then that Neptune line. I came across a couple of people that stayed on the Neptune line for a couple of years, and they said, you know, those years went by so quickly. And suddenly, like 5 years later, like I seemed to wake up like Rip Van Winkle, you know, and I feel, oh, how about that Neptune line? Inspiration, mysticism, intuition, dreams, vision quests, socialism, idealism, escapism, religion, spiritual organizations and churches, romance, unconditional love and codependence, ashrams and retreats, drug and alcohol, spirits, marriage, the dissolving ego, deception, illusion, confusion, and thus illusion, spiritual philosophies, institutions, hospitals, the water, oceans, liquids, islands, beaches, bays, and those beautiful blue, green colors. People, Neptunian sorts, could be bartenders, clergy, mystics, con artists, and the deluded, healers, hippies, idealists, spiritualists, artists, musicians, animal lovers, people looking for causes, martyrs, victims, drifters, socialists, saints, the institutionalized and hermits. By the way, I've got all of this here printed on a 3-page piece that I can send to you if you wish. Pluto, the Pluto line. Intensity, of course. Perseverance and power. Obsessions, consciousness, intrigue, sexuality, especially if it's forbidden. Intense studies or hobbies, the occult, recycling, inheritance, sarcasm, seclusion, jealousy, possessiveness, criminal inclinations. You know that the underworld kind of fits in with the Pluto realm, huh? Healing, loss, transformation, letting go and letting God. Secrets, hidden agendas, karmic lessons, the shadow, manipulation, caves and places underground, reconstruction, unseen structural problems like termites, pipes, and plumbing. And then those Plutonian people, lovers planning rendezvous, infiltrators, revolutionaries, some clever astrologers, metaphysicians, hypnotists, the mob, criminals, psychiatrists, and lesser gods. Catalysts, Robin Hoods, CIA, magicians, geologists, missionaries, sexual abusers or perpetrators, criminologists, people connected with death or dying. The moon's nodes. What I have found there is that it could be good news or bad news, but it is a variation of your childhood. If you had a good childhood, then the moon's nodes are going to be showing some good positive things. If you had a bad childhood, you may not want to go to the moon's nodes. And so it kind of reflects that which is part of the unconscious experiences growing up. Now, if you had a great childhood, then by all means, go to your lunar node lines. It represents your place in community, the approval and disapproval, karma, deja vu, knowing your position in society, rumors and reputation, peer pressure, getting along with others, fate, past lives or collective memories. Those who may push your familial buttons, good or bad, depending upon that past. Early family dynamics. Now, I also use a couple of asteroids. One can also, go off in different directions because we have so many extra points here that people can work with. But I have been working a lot with what I consider to be the 3 sub-rulers of Virgo. And those are 3 asteroid goddesses, Vesta, Ceres, and Pallas. And I think of them as goddesses of the hearth and the home, and those interested in health and healing and many other different things connected with classic Virgo traits. I go into detail about that, and it's on that list that I can send you if you wish. Interpreting, a lot of this information, I know I just gave you a ton of stuff just right now, but luckily it's recorded. So the best way in any of these lines is to just go there, just to experience them. Like I've been to quite a few of my different lines, and I've got various tales to tell, but check out the area, feel the vibes, and we then go to the relocation chart that develops the map. But when you then take a look at the AstroCartography map, you need to go back to the relocation chart, which is why I've been bringing up both of them, because you want to see those aspects. You also want to check out, which planet is in which particular sign and house natally, because that doesn't disappear. And so that's something to keep in mind wherever you go. Some people think that, like they're going to move to a so-called positive sign going off towards Jupiter, and then that Saturn-Pluto opposition is not going to bother them anymore. Sorry. They don't disappear. So, important points to ponder about these. The lines work in several different ways. And we've seen those lines. I've given you some examples now, but you may probably have your own astrocartography charts. That is, it looks like a little slender line, but actually it's a swath of energy about 300 miles wide. And think of it then with the 300 miles, then we've got like 150 miles each side. Again, just as a rule of thumb. And the interesting thing is that we can go to the lines or they can come to us. And this is something that people may not recognize, that you indeed can go to these lines, but then you can also check where do people come from, and that you may find that they bring an essence of that particular planetary energy to you through them and their personality. And I've seen that quite a few different times. For instance, I find, since you've seen that I'm from, California, in their charts, I might find some of my clients have got an important planet like Uranus or Jupiter going through California, representing me and what I can offer. Same thing too with, I'll point towards my ex-wife, who I'm very good friends with yet today, and how we show up in each other's charts. Very, very interesting. So here again, thinking of me in Vienna, and my ex-wife comes from Slovenia, which is just south of Austria. I'll show the map again in just a second. And so she is part of my Venus line, a Venusian woman, attractive, loves to dance. We had many wonderful trips together. We enjoy music and wine and so forth. She's closer to the Uranus aspect of that dynamic, which fits her perfectly because she's technically inclined, a professor in the university. And so it's, again, really quite perfect. In her chart, by the way, she's got her Mercury going through San Francisco. And I helped her with editing her journal articles. We traveled a lot together. We speak two languages back and forth to each other. And again, all the different trips and travels and humor that we have shared over the years. But then for me, myself, the Venus line in Vienna, without like saying, this is going to be a list of people that I will accept as friends in my life. Suddenly, I just found myself surrounded with ballerinas. I mean, when have I gone to a ballet? Ballerinas, musicians, artists, singers, as well as holistic therapists and metaphysicians on my Venus line. I did not consciously seek them out, but there they were. Here is a close-up here of Austria. Here's Venus up here in pink, of course. And she's over there. Here's the city of Vienna, 2 million people right there. Used to be part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And that Venus goes right through there. It goes through Croatia, goes on down here to the Croatian coast. And the two conjuncting planets that you have seen in my natal chart, here they are as predicted on the descendant. Here with the slanting line, here's Uranus, here's Jupiter, slanting off from Slovakia, going through Hungary, going through Slovenia, Croatia, on into Italy. And so this is a power spot, you might imagine, of probably some very interesting people, and that has certainly been the case. It was back in like 2006, I believe, that I said, I'm getting out of the United States. Where's a good place to go? I looked at my astrocartography map and I said, I think Vienna would be pretty cool. And so I just take off over there, and it was really quite an adventure. And of course, that's where I met my now ex-wife, good friend still. I'd like to also point out over here off to the left that here is the moon on the ascendant going through Bavaria. And I'm going through Germany. It continues on up through Berlin. And so here's the moon line again. And I said, people might adopt you. And one of my best friends came from there. And I've got lots of friends still in Germany, and it felt certainly like home. One can, follow that up north and find other countries, south and find other countries. But this is, what I had experienced. I'd also like to say my first experiences when I first went to Vienna, the first 2 weeks that I went to Vienna, knowing that, here's my Venus line, so forth. I tell you, I would walk around this big city and people would be walking as pairs, hand in hand. They'd be over in the park smooching. There would be very romantic sorts of things. Of course, music, playing, because this is like the land of classic composers and so forth. And I'm thinking, my goodness, are people going to be doing this the whole time I'm here? And so it was a bit of an epiphany that I had. It was certainly pleasant to see all of that. But it was a bit like Venus, I think, saying, hello, I'm right here. Because after a couple of weeks, they kind of like disappeared. And it was just like, normal big city, people just doing their things. But still, I came across the ballerinas and the musicians and so forth. So as friends. And so it occurred to me at the time that in this very same city, perhaps in the next block, perhaps, a couple of blocks from me, watching all of these Venusian couples, doing their duo dance, that there could be somebody experiencing his Saturn line in the same city and having a completely different experience than I. Recognizing again that once the kind of like the hello, yes, it's true, here we are, here's the energy, and then it kind of like fades into like having, so-called normal life. Yeah, life goes on and we continue to do other things. Here's a fictitious person, and a woman that some of you in the Asheville area may know. And I had a lovely experience with her recently, and she gave me a reading. She's a psychic, she's an intuitive, and she wanted to share some things about her chart and her astrocartography experiences. Born over here in Washington, D.C., as you see over here. And something very interesting about her chart, down here in the third house, look at this really cool alignment. Venus, Uranus, Mercury, the tail end of Gemini. Those three in the third house. Think about that right now. Because Deborah then moved down to Miami and she opened up a metaphysical bookstore. Would you ever guess that? It was really quite perfect. Now, I'd also like to tell Deborah, I don't think I've told you this before, that I believe that any planets or point at the tail end of any sign, which means 27, 28, 29 degrees, are destiny placements. Things that you must do, you have to express, you must study, you need to look at and find ways of expressing that. And here you have your Uranus next to Mercury. And as far as I can tell, you have been doing that, with your antennas up and tuning into things, but also that third house here that doesn't always disappear because you're still on the East Coast, right? And there and what's going on in your neighborhood. right? Do you want to add anything to any of that, Deborah? Here we have this fictitious person over here in North Carolina. And here is that, I hope you can see it, but here's that Mercury sign, you know, that is, you know, in that destiny placement. That's the one that goes, you know, up there from Washington, D.C., goes all the way down through Miami. Okay. But here, it's up here in North Carolina, and here's Asheville. And so Mercury's pretty much close, but I'll tell you what, you know, with that alignment, those three, you know, lined up like that, it doesn't matter where in the world you go, they're going to be shining, they're going to be talking, they're going to be expressing. But Deborah's over here very close to the Uranus line, and here's that in blue at the bottom on the IC. It's very close here. So again, those two planets which are conjunct, and Asheville is right between them. And so I imagine, like, wow, this is, you know, the lights are up and giving readings and connecting with people. And the moon then is right close to that. And you might recall the moon is next to Mars in Virgo. And I find this really interesting. The moon, of course, here's the home, okay? And here is the connector with Mercury and Uranus. And so she has intuited for people places to live with also astrocartography. And then as a real estate agent, she can find out great places for them to live. Here's a one-stop shop right there. And one thing, as I was about to say, Mars and Moon in her chart are 8 degrees apart. But look at it here in North Carolina, and the further up north that we go, those two lines are going to get closer and closer. They're 8 degrees apart, which seems, you know, quite a few degrees, but they're coming together, you know. So there's more energy between them, you know, the further north that she would go. Probably true for many different people, but it's a good, interesting thing to look at. So here we have a friend of mine from California. Her name is Ro, and she also volunteered to have something about her chart shared and expressed. And so she really just like immediately, you know, she's a Sagittarius. So she immediately goes into her Pluto line. And I'm thinking, I don't see Pluto. You know, oh, wait a minute, there it is. It is Pluto on the ascendant. You see it, it's out there in the Pacific Ocean. You see that line crossing out over there on the ascendant? You know, but for all of California, except here, we've got her sun on the IC going through San Diego, and then a straight up line through Nevada. So, okay, here's the sun line, you know, but she doesn't live down there in Southern California. She lives over in the Bay Area, and she's moved over there from Philadelphia and has been over there for, I think, maybe 30 years or more right now. So it's like, and so I say, Ro, what are you talking about? You know, with this Pluto experiences you got? Well, of course, we have to do those extra lines, right? And so here we spice it up, looking at the different lines. And here is also an example of, you have to be very careful with these extra lines when you put them on, because it could be like overwhelming if the chart is too big of a space. Now, this is, you know, from California, Nevada, Utah. It's a large area, so there's going to be lots of lines. But it's easier to look at the extra lines when you have a smaller map. Okay, but California is a big state. So yes, now I understand from Ro what she's talking about with her Pluto and her Pluto experiences. Here, up here is Pluto squaring the midheaven. It's that reddish color. It goes right down close to the San Francisco area. But here on along the coast is her Saturn trining the midheaven right up there, which is going to add more of a professional responsibility. And so seeing some of these different things, here's her chart, by the way, and she's got a Libra rising. Here's an interesting Venus-Neptune conjunction in Scorpio, which is very good for someone who is empathetic, sensitive, caring, and wanting to be a positive transformation, a catalyst for positive change for people. And that is what she has been doing as a therapist and counselor. And then here is the Sagittarius here, Sun conjunct Mercury, straddling the second and third houses. Her Pluto that she was telling me about shows up here in the 11th house, and it's, conjunct the planet Uranus. And if I tell that to many astrologers, they say, oh, this is one of those 60s kids. And indeed, born in 1962. And so that really interesting conjunction, relatively rare, Uranus-Pluto, which represents the 60s. And so she's definitely a hippie girl. So here was her report to me, and I'm going to report it to you, looking at her Pluto over here and what it represents. Pluto conjunct ascendant in California. No astrologer would ever encourage someone to move to their Pluto line, right? But Pluto is so complex. Isn't he also the god of riches? And Pluto's riches aren't just material. Though I've never seen a chart of a billionaire who doesn't have a dominant Pluto. So I like to think that Pluto on the ascendant in my AstroCartography chart offers the opportunity for growth and personal transformation of every kind. And just like in a natal chart, when a planet on the ascendant indicates that the person will be an ambassador of that planet's energies, Pluto on my AstroCartography ascendant could allow me to show up as a catalyst for transformation and hopefully healing in the lives of others. In my work life, I've worked as an astrologer and therapist, but spent a bunch of time in Plutonian realms. 2 years working in a shelter for domestic violence, over 6 working with severe mental illness and homelessness, and 7 years volunteering in a free clinic providing complementary medicine to low-income women with cancer. Lots of Plutonian realms. And my own Plutonian journey, though I guess everyone has a Plutonian journey, because I also have Jupiter conjuncting my descendant. That's also, yeah, evident. The 6-degree orb. I met my partner in a graveyard. Yes, that's where we met. And we've had a number of Plutonian deaths and rebirths in our relationship, including getting divorced and later remarrying. So that's Rose's journey here close to her Pluto line. Now, what about those places of no lines? What I have seen, what I've noticed, recognizing that we can also, include those trines and those squares, but when there's really no lines, not a lot of extra planetary energy, things kind of revert to your own resources. It's like you're more in charge of yourself. It's what you do that gets things going, which also means maybe you don't get a lot of cosmic help in that sense, but you don't get a lot of interference either. So it's free will and self-determination. One can put in other points too, just to make sure that you don't have these empty spaces, but I think, well, hey, allow the empty spaces in your free will and so forth. And I like to keep things relatively clear and clean. It also should be a correct chart. That is very important. a rectified chart or a corrected birth time, adjusting the midheaven, by the way. For instance, 4 minutes time, birth time, that could be 1 degree off. And there are 15 degrees in every time zone. So you could, like be off if you don't have an accurate birth chart. And by the way, and many of you who've been doing astrology for some time, you know that, when the nurse wrote down the birth certificate, it could have been after the C-section and before the coffee break, right? So sometimes, it's just as close as they could get. But accuracy is very important, which reminds me of the Arizona gal. Years ago, I met a client who got her astrocartography reading from another astrologer before she came to me. And he told her that her Jupiter line was over Tucson, Arizona. She got very excited, went to Tucson, went to a university because it's a Jupiter line, and she got a job over there. They didn't have a job in her specialty area, but they did have a job as a groundskeeper there. And she thought, well, that's a foot in the door on my Jupiter line there in Arizona. Then I rectified her chart once she was there, and she'd been there for maybe a year or two. And we found out that she was not on her Jupiter line. That was in California. What she had moved to was her Mars line. And so she was a groundskeeper, and she actually liked it. She moved a lot. She rode her bicycle to work. She was in great shape after a couple of years. She enjoyed the physical stuff, being outside, working with tools, and she became very fit. The only downside, she told me, is that she had some boyfriends who had temper problems. Well, there's that Mars for you, huh? Now for something completely different. Astrological feng shui. I'm not sure if many of you have played with that, but it's another calculation that you could make with many astrology programs. And I've played with this from time to time. It's not exactly off track. It's still looking at maps and geographies and locations and placements and so forth. But you can print this out. And this is me relocated over to Vienna again. And you can place it in the middle of your abode, and here's the north, east, south, west. Okay, so put it, align it up correctly, and then you can find out where you should put your beer, or your meditation place, your altar, your library, your computer, so forth. You can also expand it onto a map of the city, place your astrological feng shui chart right there, and start looking northeast, southwest for things. I played with this for a few years just to find out how it would work. And I didn't find it, was working so strongly, but it gave me some pointers of things to look for. So I just include this here as a subgroup of some interesting things you can do with maps. Time. Now we're going to go bigger. We're going to go towards, large people, public figures. And then just recently here, just the very last day of December 2022, Joseph Ratzinger, Pope Benedict XVI, died. And what an interesting fellow he was. And you'll see very soon his chart, and then his astrocartography chart, and Aries. And yes, a pope, and he did something so unusual to step down from the position, which I believe was like, it hadn't been done since like the 1420s or 1450s, something like that. It was like really unprecedented, maybe 600 years. But he followed his conscience. He seemed to have some sort of illness that he just wanted to retreat, and I think he did the good thing. He did the wise thing with that. But he was a pragmatic type, as you will see, son of a police officer from a farming family. He was, before we get to the chart here, a little bit more about the Pope Benedict. I'm going to point towards the ruler of his 10th house is conjunct his first house, and you'll see that is going to be very interesting. But you'll see his Mars is strong and persuasive in Gemini, conjunct the North Node. And I believe it's the nodes. Remember, I was talking about the nodes as where you stand in position to your society and tradition. And he broke tradition. Here's Mars right on that nodal line, by abdicating, as it were. You'll also see Mercury, Uranus in a T-square with those nodes and Mars adding to it. I also want to point out that he was lovingly called the enforcer within the Catholic Church. So here's his chart. And again, as I had told you, very interesting. I mean, this is almost like mind-numbing. It's so interesting. Here is the midheaven natal chart, Sagittarius. And the ruler of Sagittarius is Jupiter. Where's Jupiter? Right here, 1 degree away from his ascendant in Pisces, and he's the Pope. I mean, the mouthpiece of the big church. I mean, right there, what are you going to do as your career, buddy? I'm going to be Jupiter megaphone for the Catholic Church right there. I mean, how interesting. Here's the Uranus conjunct Mercury, 2 different signs, but also a close conjunction over there. And again, thinking of those destiny positions that I had talked about before, Mercury, 28 degrees, a mouthpiece, a communicator, someone that makes his papal statements, right? His blessings and so forth, people watching his words and wording. Here it is squaring Mars in Gemini that I had talked about before. And a hard fellow, this was the enforcer, okay? Strong-minded, conservative, a theologian, a scholar. By the way, I noticed also as I was looking at this, Moon intercepted in Libra in the 7th house, and he retreated his last years. He was around, but you didn't know. I mean, suddenly when he died, a couple months ago, I thought, is he still alive? He disappeared, and that's kind of an intercepted thing. The sun is trine Ceres in the 9th. True.
So Ceres is traditionally known as the mother energy. So the Pope is the father energy. And since you work with the asteroids, I wonder how you would interpret that.
Very
and also
good,
there's
very
an
interesting.
aspect
Remember
to,
that he came from a farming
also.
background, a farming family. And so Ceres is right up there. And I can't remember specifically, but I believe that there were a couple of different times that he was talking about food for the masses, taking care of course, there's many Catholic countries that are poor, and caring for them, but of a practical nature too, food, security, sustenance, things of that nature. I don't have the details on that, but I kind of vaguely remember things like that. In the meantime, that's really interesting, because that is, the mother, the father, the mother church, and it's right up there too, conjunct that midheaven. It's also stationary, you might see, there's an S.
Yeah.
So stationary Ceres. We get the word cereal from Ceres. And so foods, grains, harvests, things of that nature. I don't know enough about him to say too much more.
No, I get it. I think I would interpret that as the nurturing quality, not literally the mothering energy, but in a way it is. So I got that. Thank you.
You know, offhand, you know, certainly, you know, Mother Mary is such a big iconic figure in the church for centuries. And you cannot be the Pope without honoring, you know, the mother, right? And she's right up there, you know. It's just really interesting because I haven't seen too many Pope charts.
I wonder if you had any visions.
No, right? Yeah, visions. Yeah, that would be cool. Yeah. So you might recall this chart because this was the mystery guest chart that I had pointed at the very beginning. This is Pope Benedict the 16th and his astrocartography lines. And of course, what we really want to take a look at is what's happening in Italy. And sure enough, that same Jupiter, there it is, you know, right on the ascendant going close to Rome. It's right in the middle of Italy. And so with that, you know, 300 miles to 500 kilometers, it is Jupiter right there. I mean, destined, as it were. We see what a powerful planet it was anyway, but there it is. And then at the very tail end of Italy, we have got that Mars line on the IC, again, close to the nodes. And I call it nipping at the hills, you know, of various Martian dynamics of contention. And heaven knows there's been some scandals, you know, for the last how many years that he probably had to deal with. And on one side, I think that he wanted to play the policeman and make sure that, you know, everybody was going to behave, but that, you know, tough man patriarchy wasn't really working, if it ever did. Mundane, number 2. This is interesting. This you're going to really find very interesting. Of course, I mean, this is what got, you know, the United States involved in World War II. Pearl Harbor, and the famous day, the 7th of December. What day is this? A day that will live on in infamy. Yeah, very important. It took basically a country that was kind of hands-off, not wanting to get involved with the European politics. They had enough from World War I, and it was an isolationist country. And this day, this minute, this chart, this time pulled the United States into World War II. Okay, very important, very significant. And look at the nadir down here. Look at the IC. Mars, we're talking about war, right? Mars, 15 degrees 32. The IC, 15 degrees 41. What? My goodness. Okay. Now, also some interesting things right in this chart. Here is the person in question who was harmed. In this case, you know, the Hawaiian Islands. In this case, the United States, Capricorn. So this would be the person in question in this attack. Open enemy is opposite over here. Cancer, and the ruler of Cancer is the moon over here, representing, of course, Japan, moving soon out of its sign, moving towards Pluto in the 8th. What could that mean? In the meantime, remember, we've got this Saturn, the personhood of the United States. Where is Saturn, the ruler of the chart? It is to be found in a conjunction, a rare conjunction, with Saturn-Uranus in the Earth fixed sign Taurus. This at the very instant that that bomb hit Pearl Harbor, I see the birth of a child, fifth house, of a nuclear bomb. Saturn, Uranus, and Taurus. What is going to be the result of this? My goodness, huh? Interesting. Here is the astrocartography chart of that moment. Look at Mars exactly over the little island of Oahu. I mean, wow. Yes, Ronnie.
Oh, just a little side note. I believe Japan is an Aries country. You got
Ah, okay. I didn't know that. Yeah, which would make sense. Here's the aggressor, the Aries country, the Martians, coming over and attacking, the Cancer country, which, that wakes up the mama bear. Here now is the classic cause and effect found at the very moment that the planes dropped their bombs on Pearl Harbor. Here again on the right-hand side, here's the Mars, going right over Oahu, going over the Hawaiian Islands. Over here on the right side, you see that line. The effect of that, we go back to Japan and look, Pluto goes right through the heart of Japan. I mean, wow. What's also interesting, what's also cool, but what's also kind of wild, by the way, giving us a different flavor of Venus. Venus shows up over here on the IC, and it goes right straight up here through the western part of Japan. Venus. Here's a close-up of that very same map. Here is Pluto going right through the middle of Japan. Venus goes right over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This is the plumed serpent of the Mesoamerican myth. The firebird, the Quetzalcoatl, the Kukulkan bird that is, they used Venus also as part of their warrior energies. So, and this is just an example of that, but it still turned out Venusian because, Hiroshima, for example, is now a city of peace and a sign of no more war. What a transformation that turned into. Are we ready for another interesting one? 9/11. I mean, yeah, here's another one, an attack. Now, we had that attack, of course, from Pearl Harbor, and it was really clear who the culprit was. Here, there's a murkiness connected to it. We still have the attack. Many of us astrologers, we've looked at this chart many times because it was so significant. This with the attack in New York City, two planes, right? The twin towers, and what is rising but Mercury. Mercury conjunct, close conjunction right there. And again, the person in question, the victim here, is found on the ascendant, and that is Libra. And where is Venus? It's up here in Leo. That very soon garnered the international sympathy of the world. Right there. 11th house, Venus, Leo, opposing Uranus over here in the 5th house in Aquarius. So very soon, some people were looking for weapons of mass destruction. And then there was all kinds of drama connected to that, as well as getting a coalition of supporters together, both Uranus as well as the 11th house. One would look over here for open enemies on the 7th house, and classically, here's, it would be perfect here with Aries. We would be looking for Mars. Mars shows up down here in the 3rd house, right next to the south node. And things get a little bit murky down there. One would think in a mundane chart, in a political chart, the 3rd house could be a neighboring country. That doesn't seem likely, but it's next to the south node. And so there was a lot of talk about blowback, a Martian term, a CIA term, of the unintentional repercussions of foreign policy. And one could look at the 3rd house as foreign policy of a Martian nature in Capricorn, and that muddied the waters, as it were. We would think probably more about the 9th house. These are countries, far away, with another perspective. And sure enough, that's a busy house. We've got a very intriguing Saturn up there in Gemini, opposing Pluto. Saturn opposed Pluto for the 9/11 attack. Really quite perfect. However, we can also take a look at hidden enemies, and that seemed to be the situation here. The 12th house. Here is the sun in the 12th house of hidden enemies. Also Mercury, which rules the 9th house of other foreign countries, in the 12th house. So it's like, oh my goodness, what a web of deceit and deception and drama, all connected to that. So what does that map look like? Here is the 9/11 map in the United States. And we saw that Mercury right over the top of New York. And there it is, right over the top of New York. There's Mercury on the ascendant. And right in the heartland, right here in the heartland, basically kind of like representing, the essence of the United States in this attack, we have got Moon opposed Mars. And it's like you riled up the Cancer in this dynamic all the way to the bones. That's how I would look at this. But remember, we were looking at, with the Pearl Harbor attack, the cause and effect. Let's take a look at that same 9/11 chart, now international. And what do we find? Remember that Saturn-Pluto opposition? Here they are, right going through Afghanistan. How about that? By the way, it goes quite strongly through Pakistan. And I do remember periodically, they would do these attacks and they would go hide in Pakistan because it was protected, and then they would go back and back to Afghanistan. So I remember that drama going on that included Pakistan. But how interesting that the Saturn-Pluto, dangerous, explosive, combative alignment goes right through Afghanistan. But here's Iraq. Here's Neptune here. Here's Ceres a little bit further away. I don't see anything in Iraq, do you? So here's that response. And indeed, we found in Afghanistan, the Saturn in Gemini opposed Pluto in Sagittarius. Nothing in Iraq. Where to look? Ah, here it is. We've established a clear link, said our fearless president at the time, George Bush. So because I didn't find Iraq, which turned in, of course, as we know, was part of a 20-year war that we had with Iraq, because of 9/11. Could it have something to do with George Bush? So again, probably many of you have seen this chart. Here he is, a Cancer, born on the 6th of July, Leo rising, and the Mercury-Pluto conjunction in Leo. Conspiracies and could this be someone who, when he grabs a hold of an idea, he's just going to go with it? Probably. And but also known for his big coalition thing, and gathering many other countries together in this. I think he used the word crusade, and then someone says, no, you shouldn't use the word crusade. Here in the 3rd house of communications. We'll take a look at George Bush's chart in the Middle East. And guess what? Here we have his Mars going right through Afghanistan. And here's Pluto going through Iraq. And interestingly enough, here's that Venus showing up again, but it's getting very, very close to Kuwait. And the Kuwait story with George Bush. His father went in to save Kuwait against Saddam Hussein. And here it shows up in this is when George was born. Venus smiling upon what his father did to help indeed a country that was picked on, kind of similar to Russia invading Ukraine. Iraq was invading Kuwait at the time. This is about 20 years ago. And no, it's 30 years ago now. And so there was this good feeling, think Venus, from the time when the United States came in to help at that point. He was using a bit of that, but Pluto goes through Iraq, and it came from George Bush. It did not come from 9/11. So, speaking of presidents and key people, I'd have to say personally, this, thank goodness Donald Trump did not start a war. At first, when he became president, I thought, here's a Gemini. We're going to have 2 wars, just like George had 2 wars. Yay, he didn't. His Mars, as you may know, goes conjunct his ascendant in Leo, and it goes right over Washington, D.C. Mars in Leo, Washington, D.C. I know that doesn't mean anything to you all. Interestingly enough, the opposite side of the world to that Mars, his Mars on the descendant goes through North Korea. What does that mean? Well, there's no need for maps, I'd have to say. So we're going to just move on from the dawn.
Here we have Joe Biden, President of the United States, here, 2024. And of course, this is an election year. Many of you have seen his chart before. He has quite a few planets, 4 planets in Scorpio in the 12th house over there on the left. And that is, of course, someone who for many, many decades had been in kind of like the back rooms, wheeling and dealing and making strategic plans and so forth politically. Thank goodness he's got that Sagittarius rising. And one of the interesting things about Sagittarius, the Archer, is that it might move too quickly. And that was an issue with the more circumspect Scorpio in the 12th house, wondering what did I say, or should I say it, or how should I say it? Meanwhile, Sagittarius rising, he just says it. And so we had probably some of that stuttering that we know about from his youth. The ruler of Sagittarius is Jupiter. Jupiter up there in another water sign, Cancer, in the 8th house, which is an honorary Scorpio house. And again, politics and deals, but it's nice because in Cancer, we're talking about someone who is wanting to take care of the big family, and this is the political family, and of course he is a political man. That Jupiter makes a lovely trine to his Mercury, Sun, and Venus in the 12th house. Meanwhile, his own moon is over there in the 5th house in Taurus, and one could say there's a lot of emotional drama, let's say, to be found over there with his family, with his children. And I'll have to point out there that that moon makes a square to Pluto up in the 9th. And yes, there has been some dramas, fatalities, and sadness connected to family and children in particular. Notice also the Saturn, Uranus. They're pretty close enough for a conjunction, I'd say, even though they're in two different houses. Uranus in the 6th, Saturn in the 7th, and this is again a sign of a very political person. And so again, back to the charts, here is Joe Biden in Europe. And I wanted just to point out over here on the right-hand side, Neptune on the descendant going right through Ukraine. And although there is some unclarity, let's say, some things that he may not know about, subterfuge, a bit of a chess game sort of thing, that is in the Ukraine. The good thing here, however, is that it's not like any big, Mars or Saturn or Pluto over there. And so I don't think that is going to be really the trigger for any kind of great issues. We take a look here also, remembering he has that Saturn Uranus, and here over in the United States, Saturn and Uranus straddle on both sides. Washington's east, right there in the middle. Both of those planets covering the whole East Coast, and of course he is from Delaware, officiating legally from Delaware. And so an East Coast person, and that's where, again, all the power is with Joe Biden.
We changed tack a little bit, still looking at some larger perspectives. This is maps as omens, symbolizing signs and symbols and omens. Here recently, of course, I'm referring here to the February 3rd big train wreck in Ohio. And it was in, of course, all the news. Here's a picture of the wreck. The next day, on the 4th, everything is still aflame. You can see what a mess it was. I mean, a big stack of cars. And what was really bad is that it was filled with all kinds of chemicals, dangerous, noxious chemicals of various sorts that were dangerous to the public. And within a short time, the Ohio River was polluted. Thousands of fish were killed very quickly. Then the lawyers came in, the fingers started pointing. Then we found out that there was like this thing that was brewing for a long time, with people in the business cutting costs so that they can create a little bit more profit for themselves, and getting away from safety standards and having poorer equipment that resulted in this. So all of this could have been avoided, like so many train wrecks. And of course, then I'm talking about this also as an omen. And so think train wreck. Here is the chart of the time there that the train went off. And I'd like to point out some of these things that I talked about brewing a train wreck. Here is the moon up here in Cancer opposed to Pluto in Capricorn. We already talked about, people cutting corners, trying to make a profit, not caring about safety, thinking about themselves, thinking about the bottom line, going towards, the investors, stockholders, and things like that, as well as probably a cover-up if Pluto's involved with this. And then we have got on this very day, and the sun moves 1 degree per day. On this very day, the sun was squaring pretty much exact the planet Uranus. Uranus in the 8th house. Okay, and a couple of these different things, just by themselves, you'd say, oh, okay, but when you start adding all of them up, okay. When I think of the river being polluted, of the fish dying, of the chemicals, I'm thinking I could look at the moon. Okay, it's opposed to Pluto. Okay, it's involved. I can also look at Neptune, and here it is at this time, and it was just setting when the train wreck occurred, when it went off the tracks. Just setting. And so there's two aspects going on. The Neptune on the descendant, and then the Neptune squaring the midheaven and IC. And the maps will show that. Here, what it said in the news, by the way, around 9 p.m. That's what it said. And so I made this chart, a map here of Ohio, and 8:55. This is, where things were happening. Here on this border with Pennsylvania, that's where the town is, East Palestine. Here's Neptune on the descendant. It's moving, in this direction. Here is, however, the square, Neptune square midheaven and IC right there. Here, a few minutes later, 8:58, you see the Neptune square is now just about on the border. Neptune has moved on a bit. And then at 9 o'clock, boom, they have crossed the border. We're talking 2 minutes, just two minutes, and it was in Pennsylvania, and then boom, it's in Ohio. Again, just points towards you just have to have an accurate chart, to make these. This might even be something that we could even use as a rectification device astronomically. Because it was, right between these two, when Neptune was squaring the Neptune with the midheaven, on going across the border at 8:59. But again, it was a terrible situation. I think they're still suffering from it now, 2 months later. But I talked about this as an omen, because it was in the little town of East Palestine. And I'm very quick to look at signs and omens, and I say, Palestine, of all towns, what's happening in the other Palestine? What's happening in Israel? Is there a train wreck happening over there at the same time? And indeed, on that same day, there was. Yes, Ronnie.
Do you consider the anaretic degree has to be 29, or can it be, in other words, Saturn is 28 plus of Aquarius. So if you were going to cheat a little and call it an anaretic degree or the last degree of a sign, it would have been its destiny for this to happen. And here's one of the good things that came out of it. And one of the, well, not necessarily came out of it, but brought attention, but also it brought attention to the corruption in the train industry and all that goes along with that. So any thoughts about that? Is that considered an anaretic degree?
That's very good.
Even
That's very good, Ronnie. I totally agree with that.
Okay, my other question along those lines is, I have 29 Cancer rising. So is the ascendant also considered a destiny, even though it's a point, not a planet?
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Yep. And you are the den mother over there. It's your destiny. So yes, I mean, very good points, because was this destined, and when that happened, immediately when the train wrecked, I said, East Palestine of all towns, I'm looking over towards Israel. And is there a train wreck? And remember, we're talking symbolically now. Is there a train wreck, and has this train wreck been cooking for a while? And we find out with the actual train wreck there, going from Pennsylvania to Ohio to East Palestine, 20 miles before the train wreck, there was pictures that one of the cars was on fire. So it was cooking, and it's just again symbolically saying this was a train wreck ready to happen. The news then in Israel, I quickly looked, from East Palestine to Israel, says that train wreck has been cooking also for a while. And Netanyahu, which, by the way, if you don't know too much about him, I personally think that he's kind of like a midpoint between like Dick Cheney and Mitch McConnell. And so this is trouble. And I understand also that, part of the reason why he wants to remain prime minister is so that he won't be prosecuted for his various personal issues that's just waiting for him when he doesn't have his protection anymore. But again, policy changes, going from away from a two-state Israel to more of a one-state, which is like, free grabs to, go for all of the property you wish, and kick out the extra Palestinians. So it's really quite a mess. And basically, and again, I just read it as East Palestine train wreck, Israel train wreck. It's a sign. We move now into the future. And here is a very different way of looking at maps. Here is a very cool map of the United States with the eclipse lines coming up. This is the eclipse coming up for October 2023, and then next April 2024. And look at that interesting pattern. And look how they cross right there in Texas. I mean, my goodness, what might that portend? And we're coming up, of course, towards our 2024 election. But also things are like, with the conspiracy theories, with the various indictments, people choosing sides, all sorts of things. It's really quite a mess right here, right now. And this map, I think, is really quite appropriate for what's going on in the United States. You can see here that it's, yeehaw deep in the heart of Texas. And it could point towards various things. I mean, it's right there, that cross, those two, towards immigrants on the border. That's been an issue for a while. Southern uprising too. I think Ted Cruz just recently talked about, he's going to keep on doing his thing. Various other conservatives there, And I think of the Dixie flag when I looked at that thing too, with the cross and with that map. Of course, we're drug cartels too, also dangerous. What's being smuggled across that border, power grabs. So that is pointing towards the future that we'd have to be very cautious about. It's not a big surprise if you've been paying attention to anything going on down there in Texas as well as the border. And we are moving towards that really interesting and dynamic Saturn-Neptune conjunction in early Aries 2025, 2026. And I think that the eclipse points are just like warning us, pointing in that direction.
I think that
Yeah.
If you listen to Marjorie Taylor Greene, she wants states to secede and keep their qualities of politics, and Texas could be the first one. And interestingly enough, if you look at popular culture, the movie, I think it's whatever the movie is, Yellowstone. I think they're quitting the movie right now. It's at its end point, or it's shifting actors, but I think I just heard that it's ending. So that's another symbolic. I always look at popular culture and related to politics. It's very interesting.
Very good, very
Right.
interesting. Yes, yeah. So, yeah, there's the big picture. That's what I had gotten so far out of this. As I said before, if you would like to have my 3-page description of those astrocartography points and the planets and so forth, here's my email. You can send a request. I can send that to you. It's a PDF. Happy to share that with you. I know that I covered a lot of territory. I went around the globe. But I was excited about all the different things that one can say about this and do with it, and the many ways that one can use maps in different variety of ways. So any questions about anything I've said so far, or anything that you'd like to know about, or questions?
I have a question, if I may. The chart of 9/11, the South Node in Capricorn conjunct Mars. If you consider the South Node sort of a karmic connection, what was moving to what's going to be, and you can connect Bush Senior with George Bush's, that's George Bush's, I lost my train of thought here, but somehow I was wondering if there's a connection with the nodes and ancestral karma. In other words, the father, the son, and also it's in Capricorn, and New York is a Capricorn city. So do you consider the nodes the energies are connected ancestrally to the family?
Yes, because the
words,
nodes
Bush-
oftentimes in an individual family could point towards the family tendencies and the climate of, what is happening, or what is okay, what's not okay, what are the rules of the family, what are the intentions, and the prestige and the social role of the individual families. And then that can be ballooned out into national charts, and so then general international reputations, and where you stand in the world, your position in various things. And of course, then the Bush family, came out and, was growing and growing in power, with the Bush Senior. And so then a tradition was set, to be a nodal thing that then W grabbed a hold of, and we all know his Jupiter moon, that he was more of a party boy, and growing up, he wasn't as serious as his father. But he was using that reputation, that positive karma, let's say, for his own political career. Now, I also think that there's something else going on in the karma of the United States, a country that one could say a country of immigrants, but also a country of invaders. And as much as one could be proud and wave the flag and so forth, pretty much there was some genocide and kicking the Native Americans off of their own lands. And I believe that, and that I'm into reincarnation, so that's an aspect of this, that some of those people, I believe, have come back, and they could be quite angry about those pioneers who came in wantonly, and just started shooting or taking over and so forth. And this is only a supposition. I don't know. It's just me thinking cause and effect karma and national karma, that I'm wondering if some of these senseless shootings that have been happening like an illness, for now decades, is that some of the national karma, coming back, that we killed the innocent kids and families of the Native Americans, and now the innocents are being slaughtered today. I don't know, but it has crossed my mind.
That's a very good point. I have another question, Stephen, around astrocartography. Is there ever a system that coordinates the signs of the countries in relationship to the lines crossing from a personal chart? Because I mentioned a couple of cities that had, astrological signatures, and I think that's a great addition. It's complicated, but it would be fascinating to check that out. Does that exist anywhere?
I've never seen that, and it would be complicated, and especially with some of the older countries, like 400 years old, 500 years old. When were they born? Getting that accurate birth information. Although there are historical traditions that certain countries are connected to signs, and certain cities are associated with different signs, and they've been using those for hundreds of years. So that information is already out there, and it would be interesting to kind of put them together to see how that would fit.
It would be.
I think it'd be pretty complicated too.
Would be. Great presentation. Thank you so much.
Yep. You're welcome. Yep. My pleasure.
Yes, thank you. It was really fascinating.
Thank you. That was great.